we'll do that. Welcome everyone again. For those of you that are just coming in, my name is Miriam Hernandez Jennings, and I am one of the founders and coordinator of Natick is United. And I am here this evening with Lee Manuel, also a founder and community engagement coordinator, Hanley, and then also April Maza, assistant coordinator. Being true to our mission, that Natick is a community where we value differences and everyone belongs, we are partnering with the Natick Immigration Coalition, the members that you will be hearing from in a minute, to bring this important dialogue to our community. We are going to take a look at our Zoom etiquette, because I think it's important for us to be able then to have some rules of what we would like to do to create a safe space. And this is just how we do this in Zoom. I'm sure that many of you are very used to this, please, check your name to make sure that we know who is present here. As much as possible, be on video. I think it's important when we're having these conversations to be able then to connect. And it's the only way that we can do this via Zoom. Hopefully in the future, we will do these conversations in person. But for now, we need for everybody to hopefully be on video so that we can see them. Adjust your camera and lighting so that we can see your face as well. So your beautiful faces need to show. And then raise your hands when you want to speak, or sometimes you, if you're able to just come off mute and ask questions when we have the questions and answer session. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. That is very, very important because we usually hear a lot of background noise. And then be mindful of background noise, as I was just saying, and distractions around you as much as possible. So I will go over now our objectives. And what we want to do tonight is, or by the time that all of us, end this workshop, we would like to feel that everybody has an understanding of the challenges faced by newcomers in Natick and surrounding community, ways that our community is responding to the needs of immigrants, and then an immigration policy being proposed and the potential benefits it represents for our community. And just before you meet the panelists, we would also like to have some agreements. And these are a little bit more than the Zoom etiquette. So as much as possible, please be present. And no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. I think that is a very nice agreement that all of us here are learning, and we are creating a learning community together. Let's struggle together, right? Let's bring it into the room in a respectful, civic way, so that we can have conversations. And then lean into your growing edge. Embrace some of the discomfort that may happen here, right? And I think that that is how we create a community that embraces differences, a community that really and truly wants to become a welcoming community. And trust the process. This is one of the first conversations that we want to have with our community. There will be many more, and we want to do it respectfully. And that's why we want this to be a process rather than a sprint. Practice confidentiality. Please, if you want to share what happened here, do not share the names of the people that share information while we were here this evening. And then assume good intent while being mindful of a responsive to impact. So that means that when you want to speak and let others know what you're thinking and what is in your mind, that you do it in a way that you will think about others and how that is going to be received. Does that sound good to everybody? And if you have something that you would like to add, put it in the chat. That will make you feel very safe and also brave while we're having these conversations. All right? Very good. So now I will introduce you to the awesome community members that are also part of the Immigration Coalition. So we have Cody Jacobs. He is a BU lecturer and also community activist. Susan Simone Kang, she is a legal counsel from Moreno Law, and it was her birthday yesterday, so you can also wish her happy birthday through the chat. Marjorie Robinson, awesome colleague, a retired Natick Public Schools teacher, and she works with Metro West Immigrant Center as a volunteer. Marge and I have traveled to the border in Sahuarita, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico, to do some work and learn for ourselves what is happening with immigrants there. And then Caitlin O'Neill, she is the ELE coordinator for pre-K through pre-K to 8 grades in the Natick Public Schools. So welcome, everyone. Thank you to all the panelists that are here to help us to have this conversation. And we will begin with Cody. He will introduce himself, and then we will follow the list that we had just a minute ago, how we're going to do the presentation. All right, everybody's ready?
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Miriam. Yeah, so you just introduced me, so you guys know who I am, but I'm Cody Jacobs. In addition to the things Miriam said, I'm also a town meeting member and proud Natick resident. So I'll just get right to it. I just want to start us off by kind of setting the table about kind of how we got here and what this, what the purpose of this event is. So I wanted to first talk about the Natick Immigration Coalition. Miriam mentioned us, and it's not just the people on this panel, but it's a broader group of residents that from many different backgrounds in Natick who have been working towards trying to think about ways that we can make Natick a more inclusive place for everyone, and specifically with a focus on immigration. We came together a couple of years ago, I think kind of dismayed about some things that were going on nationally and thinking about ways locally that we could make a difference for immigrant communities here who may feel afraid or may feel targeted or left out. And so that is why we came together. And in doing so, we did some research on things, and we did notice that one gap between Natick and other communities in Massachusetts is that we do not have a formal policy codifying our commitment to being a welcoming community for immigrants. So over the past 2 years, we've kind of carefully done a lot of research on this issue. We've talked to various stakeholders, especially in town government, such as the chief of police, members of the select board, members of our public schools. But we really wanted to take the next step of engaging with broader community. We can talk to ourselves, and we're sort of in a I mean, we are a diverse group, certainly, but we wanted to get outside of our bubble and hear from other people with other perspectives. And so that's the point of this event tonight, was kind of to talk a little bit about what we've been doing and kind of bring it to a broader audience. Next slide, please. So first, just a little background on the policy, and I'm sort of going to save more of the nuts and bolts of what the policy is and what it isn't for towards the end of the presentation. But just a very brief overview. What a welcoming immigration policy is it is a policy that provides that Natick government will treat everyone equally, regardless of their immigration status. That's it, basically. It's at its most simple level. Again, I'll explain some more details later on. But that's what these policies do that, exist in other jurisdictions in Massachusetts. It certainly, doesn't inhibit any normal law enforcement operations, doesn't prevent anyone from being arrested, charged, or convicted. And in fact, as you'll hear later, it actually enhances law enforcement operations by enhancing cooperation between immigrant communities and law enforcement, which again, we'll talk about a little more detail as this goes along. One quick thing about just nomenclature, naming, why do we call it a welcoming policy as opposed to a sanctuary policy? You may have heard the term sanctuary policy used, or sanctuary city or sanctuary town. And, I think that that it's a good question, but I think that our choice of the word welcoming is for a couple of reasons. One is to just have consistency with the language used in other policies in Massachusetts. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. This is something that exists in other places, and they've usually referred to it as a welcoming immigration policy. We also got some feedback from select board members, other people in government about kind of that being sort of a loaded term. And I think part of that, and this was some concerns we had internally, was we don't want to communicate the wrong message or overpromise about what a policy like this does. It wouldn't, provide any services to anyone or anything like that. It's not really a true sanctuary. All it is just a policy that, again, is just about treating everyone equal. And so we think the welcoming language is a little bit more consistent with that. Next slide, please. And so, I think though one of our goals for tonight was not just to make this so granularly about the policy, although I will get into, as I mentioned, I'll get into more details about that when it turns back to me later towards the end of our talk. But we wanted to put this in a broader context because, we know that a welcoming immigration policy is just one small piece of making Natick a welcoming community for everyone. It's not, no one policy is going to do that. Even government is not going to do that. It has to be all of us doing it, all together as a community. And so the idea behind this event was sort of to talk about the policy, but to place it in the broader context about kind of narratives surrounding immigration in Natick and how those relate to national narratives and things like that. And so, the panelists that you're going to hear from are very knowledgeable about that in very different ways. And I think will bring great perspectives to try to put this all in context so that we can look in the big picture, which I think is what we really want to do tonight. So with that and with a happy birthday, I'll hand it off to Susan.
I do have to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. First of all, it's a great honor and pleasure to be here today, to be with this collection of the members of our community here on the panel, as well as everyone who's taken time out of their evening to join us for this conversation, one which Miriam so eloquently said is really the beginning of a conversation that I hope will continue to happen for all of us here in Natick. I'm terribly honored and humbled, actually, because of the weight that falls on my shoulders to accurately express the law that surrounds the immigration landscape in the United States. Any self-respecting attorney would be very cautious about stating the law in many areas without knowing the case-by-case facts of a particular circumstance. And nothing could be more true than in the area of immigration law itself. And the reason for that is because there are numerous, of course, the US Constitution itself, but numerous statutes, regulations, various administrative agency codifications, and decisions that touch on the lives of immigrants on so many different levels, whether or not one's presence is lawful or not in the United States, whether or not one is entitled to be employed within the United States, whether or not one can receive a benefit in the United States, and the timing for all of that is all very specific to the nature of the individual's relationship and their status within the immigration framework. So let me start first by saying that immigrants, and I'm very happy to think about this policy as an inclusive, immigration-friendly community, because immigrants includes naturalized citizens in our community. It includes, I see Miriam's raising her hand, legal permanent residents. I'm not going to name them, but there's one among us today on this panel, a Natick resident, who is in that particular category. Visa holders of a variety of different statuses. We have a dynamic education, healthcare, and startup and biotech community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that attracts an extraordinary range of individuals from around the world who are doing cross-cutting and incredibly important work here in the Commonwealth. A group of folks, of course, that we would want to ensure are attracted to and think of Natick as one of the premier places that they would want to raise and grow their families. In addition to that, we have a variety of visa holders, researchers, students, individuals with tourism statuses, and a variety. We actually call it an alphabet soup because from A to Z, well, almost A to Z, there are visa statuses, and they all last for particular durations. They may have immigration intent or non-immigration intent, meaning that some may convert to a more permanent status, whereas other visas do not. There are individuals who've arrived through the CAM program. We have a dwindling number, but nevertheless number of DACA individuals. And we have applicants across all ranges of that process. The law and framework around each of those different statuses is incredibly complex, and I would not advise any individual to attempt to go through that process on their own without the assistance of legal counsel. It is not easily accessible to many people. Even those of us in the immigration field tend to specialize in specific subset areas, just as you would not go to a dentist to have some other part of your body fixed or looked at. The same is true for attorneys in general, but in immigration, it's also specialized. This week is a very special week because Title 42 is about to end, and I'm extremely grateful to be present here in order to later respond to any questions that anyone might have regarding what that actually means and what impacts it may have. So I spared all of you an incredibly boring PowerPoint presentation on the intricacies of immigration law, but I do want to ensure that you all know that, and also that you all know that the 14th Amendment of our Constitution has probably served to allow many of the people that are on this call today to actually call themselves U.S. citizens, and that became settled law 125 years ago due to the very courageous work of Asian American Won Kim Ark. And I can also happy to discuss what makes those of us who think of ourselves as U.S. citizens, in fact, citizens today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susan. And as Susan said, we're going to have a question and answers at the end. And so please save your questions, start jotting them down, and we will have a space for that. So now we're going to have Marge Robertson to talk about her experiences. And April, if you can put up the slide deck again, please.
Yes, I'm getting that up.
Thank you.
No, I
just thought-
create a slideshow, but I'll try not to. But I don't know as much as Susan, so I don't think I can make
No,
it.
I got it.
I am a volunteer with a Metro West Workers Center in Framingham, which has put me in contact with a number of immigrants that are in a variety of different statuses. And as Susan made clear, I hope to all of you, immigration is very complicated. There's nothing simple about it. And our hope here is to, you can go ahead one slide, just says what I'm saying right now, is that we would not make our neighbors feel out of place or observed or scrutinized. We talk about documented, undocumented, legal, illegal. Those are all words that we may or may not understand. And my question is always, whose documents? What exactly does that mean to us? And if you could go to the next slide. What does it really mean to be welcoming? When you see a family or someone you don't know, do you ask them who they are, where they're from? Does it matter to you whether they're an immigrant? Are you welcoming to them? And do you welcome them into your neighborhood? And do you think that we do that as a community, which is what we're hoping to be able to say that we do, is that we welcome people. Okay, next slide. So a number of people that I have met who at the time I met them were considered undocumented. The first is a mom from Guatemala. When working at the Workers Center, what I have done is accompany folks to court. The first person I interacted with was a mom from Guatemala who had been separated from her daughter at the border on Mother's Day in 2018. I had to drive her to New York City so that she could be fingerprinted, and Miriam went along with me so that they could talk to each other because I don't speak Spanish. She had to be fingerprinted to prove that she was the mother of this young woman who at the time was 6. And so we drove her to New York because that was the fastest fingerprinting that we could get done. They were reunited in Framingham after 55 days, and she has an asylum case pending. Fortunately, she's part of the group now that is able to work because she was separated at the border. That is something that President Biden put into effect. Susan can correct me on that if I'm wrong. The second group of people that I actually met was a father who was being asked to leave the country. He had worked in Framingham for 10 years under a stay of deportation or a stay of removal, as it's called. And so he would go and report to immigration in Burlington, and they continually granted him a stay, and then one day decided to rescind it. The co-workers, the people he had worked with for 10 years in the church where he was a member, appealed with letters and such to ICE to not deport him. And he had citizen children and was married to a US citizen, and chose to be deported rather than go into sanctuary. And he would not be able to then reapply for entry into the US for 10 years. Next slide. These are just folks that might be walking in your neighborhood. There was a father and son who were separated at the border under Title 42, sent back to Mexico. His wife, sister-in-law, and mother had already crossed over, and he was trying to join them. The Border Patrol was not willing to listen to anything he had to say. And they told him that if he tried to cross and didn't go back to Mexico, that he would be separated from his son. So the two of them were sent back to Mexico. He was kidnapped, nearly kidnapped twice while he was there. It was a very dangerous situation. He is now here. We had a man who was turned over to the police by his employer because he asked about workers' compensation after he was seriously injured. That became a fairly big labor dispute in Massachusetts. And he had also citizen children, and he was in jail for a while. That case has actually been worked out, and all of these people are now seeking asylum. And then the latest person that I've dealt with is a woman whose husband was here under a visa. He was an intern in a medical facility, and when his visa expired, was told he had to go back to his country for 2 years before he could come back. He was married, and so he applied for a hardship case that would allow him to stay and not have to go back. And he was denied, even though the other people that he had worked with were all granted the same thing. So one of the things about immigration law is it's very specific and very complicated, but it can also be a little bit arbitrary. Okay, so next slide. Those are just all folks that I've known. And again, you don't know who's in your neighborhood or what situation they're in. Deportations happen to neighbors who have lived in the US for decades, worked hard and paid their taxes. Some have even bought homes. They might have US citizen children, and they make valuable community contributions, but their stay can be rescinded and they can be told that they're going to be deported. There were a number of cases where we went with folks to the Burlington ICE office, and they were told they had to return within a week with a airline ticket out of the country because their stays had been rescinded and they had to leave. Okay, next. Asylum seekers are subject to what's called an EAD clock. It's an employment authorization. After you come into the country and file your asylum paperwork, you can apply for a work permit actually after 150 days, which usually takes 30 days to process. And there are many delays that can happen on the clock. The woman that I accompanied to New York City had been in this country for almost 2 years, and when they checked her EAD clock, discovered it had only gone to 4 days because she had moved where she was being represented, and there's a number of reasons that your clock can be reset. And so even though you may have been here those 180 days, your clock may not say that you have been. And that's before you can apply for a work permit. So imagine being in this country for that many days without being able to work, which many immigrants would like very much to do. Okay, next. So immigrants are constantly facing the possibility of deportation, having to go to immigrant court without representation. As Susan said, there's a lot of situations where you would not want to be without a lawyer, and many people can't afford that. There are many wonderful immigration lawyers who do pro bono work. So that is one way that you can get representation. But immigrants are not automatically assigned a lawyer the way you or I would be if we were arrested and taken to court. They might be arrested for a reason and have to pay bond. Motor vehicle violations was much more a problem now that Massachusetts has passed the driver's license law. Hopefully this will not be as big a deal, but often parents are driving without licenses because they're trying to get to medical appointments or get to work. Discrimination in housing. I was speaking to the new director of Family Promise, and she mentioned that oftentimes they have trouble getting housing because of the people who are part of their group there. And in particular, if someone hears that that English isn't necessarily your first language, you might run into problems because of that. Immigrants are often subject to wage theft. They might be working and the person they're working for decides not to pay them. Injury on the job, and they're often denied, they can be denied benefits even though they're covered by workers' comp. Illegal eviction. Sometimes immigrants are living with other folks and they don't necessarily have their names on the lease, but they could be just kicked out of their apartments. And lack of COVID protections and increased risk because of living, working, or driving in crowded conditions. So these are all the things that are happening to the people that might be walking down your street that is might be going on in their brain. And one of the reasons that we want to be welcoming and supportive is so that some of the other things that might be bothering them we're trying to help and make them feel more welcome. Next, I think that might be the end of me. Yes, that is the end of me.
Thank you, Marge. Thank you so much for the information that you gave us. It really puts the humanity into this conversation, and really appreciate the work that you do. And so we now have our last panel presentation or panelist, Kaylin O'Neill from the Natick Public Schools.
Hi, everybody. So just to clarify my title for you, I know it's a tough one. I am the ELE coordinator for the Natick Public Schools. So that means I work in the English Language Education Office. And within our office here in Natick Public Schools, I oversee our 12 teachers at all of the levels of schooling. So we have elementary, middle school, and then high school. And I oversee their curriculum, their teaching, our students' progress, and the finite program details of running a program in a public school. For my work here tonight, I just wanted to go over some terms with you and some state data. So an English learner is how we would refer to a student. We would refer to them as an EL. The teachers who teach EL students are EL teachers. A newcomer student is either one of two things, and I promise I'm not making these terms up. They are interchangeable and they are tough. Typically, we refer to a newcomer EL student as someone who just arrived to the United States or someone who speaks very little or no English in our schools. So you'll see here at the bottom, I have the state totals of just over 100,000 EL students in the state of Massachusetts. And then about 7% of that 100,000 fall within our newcomer category. So we have a lot of new students in the state who are very new English language speakers. I think it's important too to also look at the data and the numbers that we're getting, because in the past couple of years since COVID, we've seen.
Why can't you just let me fuck? You being weird.
So anyways, we've seen a lot of students who have come and who have gone, and this makes a large noteworthy difference when students in school administration and school staff are planning and addressing the needs of either 50 students coming in or about 70 students leaving. We're seeing a lot of students come from different surrounding areas like Boston, Framingham, and Worcester, which definitely are our neighborhood areas, so that increases the number of students that we are seeing here in Natick as well. Next slide, please. So right now we are working in specific schools within the district. We have ELE programs at the high school, at Kennedy Middle School, at Brown Elementary, Lilja Elementary, and the Bennett Hemingway School. We are hoping to expand our programs into Wilson Middle School in the 24-25 school year, which does seem far away, but we're working on it to, gear up the amount of teachers that we will need at a new school. We serve right now this year just under 250 EL students and their families. So this is where you'll probably see a large difference over the years. In the past, we usually hover at around 200 students, and now this number is continuing to grow, which is exciting for our teachers and for our students. 112 students fall into that newcomer category. So this is their first year learning any English or being in an American school system. And as you can imagine, schools are very different in different countries and different locations. So learning the routine and the structure of a new school in a new country is incredibly challenging. We have over 36 languages represented. So a language is something that is spoken and written. If you look at dialects, a dialect is usually just spoken. And if you count dialects, we have over 50 dialects and languages spoken within our school systems, which is very high. If you say a language, we have it. About 50% of our students are at the newcomer level. So they are walking into our schools again with little to no school experience or little to no English. And that really makes our model of teaching all children, it needs to be welcoming, and it needs to be friendly, and it needs to be accepting. And we as teachers have to be patient, because it is very tough. Most of our students are coming from Brazil, where they speak Portuguese, and the Northern Triangle, where they speak Spanish. We have had a lot of students this year who are coming from Ukraine and Russia. So they're definitely coming to us with different levels of stories of how they got here and the trauma that they've been exposed to in their previous lives at home. And you can go to the next slide, please. So our current research states that it takes 5 to 7 years to develop academic fluency in a second language. So that's looking at listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and all the vocabulary that goes into that to determine and measure fluency. As students come in, the younger students do learn English a little bit quicker. I think they don't have that filter up where they get nervous, and they're able to speak and take in the language like little sponges. But it is a really long process. And on top of the language, we're learning cultures, homes, schools, new routines, new structures, different food, and then really kind of finding ways to combine the school exposure and what our students have seen in their home countries and what they know now to make sure that they're at grade level proficiency for things like math and science. This is especially important in our older learners, because those gaps in that academic space, as we're learning English, they're very real. So it takes a long time to fill in those gaps to help our students meet the benchmarks and the proficiency standards set forth by the state. And then unfortunately, right now, we're really working on, managing the trauma and violence that a lot of these families have seen before they have come to Natick. And because of that, that does lead to a lot of fear and a lot of avoidance. We as school personnel never ask about status. And if parents declare they need any support with anything from food to housing, we will do our best to get it. But it is a really hard pride point for a lot of families to reach out to a school and say that they need help in their homes. And next slide, please. So just a quick snapshot of what we are doing. We are expanding our programs. We are expanding a lot of our entrance protocols within the public schools. So we've made our registration system all centralized, so families can go to one location to register for any school. This has helped a lot because we can make the location of registration a little bit more accessible, so parents don't have to drive if they don't need to. And we're really looking at our training and our instructional approaches with curriculum and all staff. This staff professional development and our professional learning communities are a big part of licensure for teachers in the state of Massachusetts. So we're really pushing out and working with all staff at different levels to ensure that we're teaching with the focus on language. We are hoping, and I know we do this every day, but to create a warm and welcoming and self-supportive community for these students. As you've heard today, these students, have come from a variety of different places. They are young and they have been exposed to many different things. So our first job is to make sure that they are safe and they are welcome and they are warm in school. This year, we have launched our new social and emotional learning curriculum, which it really works on trauma-informed teaching and giving students the coping mechanisms to work through some of that social and emotional adjustments to a new school and to a new community. And we're really trying to work and connect with our families throughout Natick as well. And my final slide for you is 2 collections of poems. And I promise it would sound better if these students were able to come and read it for you. But I will read it. in their honor. We, as at this time of the year in May, a lot of students are getting ready to go to the next grades, and they're getting ready to move through their own academic careers. So we had students do some poetry and some writing. These are not newcomer students. These are students who have been here for a little bit. But the first poem on the left is from Jesus, who is in grade 10. And his poem is, "To go to the mirror, what do you see? Do you see the same image of me? Once I saw a Puerto Rican, now I hear the voice of an American. How do you see me?" And then Eric from grade 8, his poem is, "I fought, that is why I am here. I cried, that is why I am stronger than my past. But I wasn't alone. My backup, my community, you were all here with me fighting." So I think those words are quite powerful, and I wish I could show you more work. But I think that shows the commitment to education and the commitment that we are all making here in Natick. So thank you for your time, and I hope to answer any questions if you guys have them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caitlin. And as you were telling the stories of all of those students and families, I was remembering my own story. I came here from Chile when I was 18 years old, and I was a community activist under the brutal dictator that we had. And so that's why I had to leave my country. And I have been in the United States since '83 and since 2000 here in Natick. And I am very grateful to be in this community. And my hope is that we will continue to welcome others like me into this community. So thank you so much for those stories. So Cody, I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank all of you. That was great. So I just want to bring the discussion back to as I mentioned earlier, back to the idea of a welcoming immigration policy here in Natick. And as again, just to be clear, we've heard about a lot today, and a lot of like the bigger picture of this. And this is only one piece. This is not like there's a lot going on with this, and there's a lot of things that are going on nationally with our immigration policy, and even locally or on the state level in terms of services and support and things like that. And I think it's all really important. And it's important not to get lost if it's just like the narrow focus on this one thing. But we do want to talk a little bit about it today, and I wanted to talk about what purpose it serves in light of existing state law. Massachusetts, people may have a misconception that Massachusetts already protects non-citizens, as a welcoming immigration state, but that's only partially true. There are certain things that Massachusetts law prohibits. For example, Massachusetts law prohibits police from detaining suspects in jail that are otherwise scheduled to be released at the behest of ICE. Other states do allow this, but Massachusetts does not. But there are many things that state law does not cover. So for example, under Massachusetts law, police would be allowed to ask about a suspect about immigration status, or they would be allowed to share information with ICE about people in police custody, assist with immigration raids, things like that. So there's definitely a lot of gaps that exist in Massachusetts law. And if we go to the next slide, that is why many cities and towns in Massachusetts have adopted welcoming immigration policies that close that gap by prohibiting town employees from working with, enforcing federal immigration law, from working to deport people. I should say that, this is not an exhaustive list necessarily. I think there are more towns and cities than this. It was just meant to show a sampling and to kind of show that there's a lot of different kinds of places here. You see, obviously, Boston on this list, but you also see some towns that are smaller than Natick, I think. So, I think that it shows that, there is broad support for, for creating welcoming immigration policies. And, I think that it's something that it would be good for us to have here. Now, as far as Natick specifically, where the key features would come in of a policy like this. So it would prohibit any town employee from asking for information about asking for information about a person's immigration status, prohibit town employees from participating in enforcing federal immigration laws, such as participating in raids and things like that. Except of course we're required by federal law. This is not seeking to interfere with federal law or anything like that. It's just, where we have the choice to make the choice not to participate. It prohibits town employees from, again, sharing information with ICE, like about people's immigration status, where they have it, except where they're required to. And it prohibits ICE from entering into the police department holding area. And I should say, I want to note the use of the phrase town employee here, because I think people hear immigration policy or even sanctuary policy and they think exclusively about policing. And obviously that's a big piece of it, but it's not just about police. This is about, as we've heard today, it's about gaining access to the panoply of things that the town provides and being able to access those things without fear, whether it is the police or whether it's the schools, whether it's DPW, whether it's community services that we provide, being able to again, what it's all about, going back to treating everyone the same, regardless of immigration status in Natick. It brings me to the next slide, which is the big question that I think comes up when I've talked to people in the community about this, is why do we need this? We've heard from a number of speakers today that we do have a very welcoming community already in some ways. And that includes our government. Our police department already has, we've had conversations with Chief Hicks, with the select board. The police department already does not ask people about immigration as a matter of policy, right? They provide services to everyone, don't ask about immigration status. Same with many of those other departments that I mentioned. They already have practices that are consistent with these policies. So the question comes up, well, look, we're already doing this. Why do we need to codify it? Why do we need a policy? But I think it's actually very important that we have a policy. For one thing, it sends a message to undocumented community members and others that we stand with them. We have to focus on what's going on in Natick, but we can't turn a blind eye to what's going on outside of Natick. And I think it's easy from watching what's going on in the news and things like that for folks and communities to feel attacked. And, we want to show that we stand with them. And beyond that, though, I think on a more practical level, it encourages undocumented people to, report crimes to the police, to work with the police when needed. This is why in many of those communities I just listed, the efforts to enact these policies have been led by folks in law enforcement, by the police departments themselves, because of that. And, to be able to utilize town services without fear as well is very, very important. So, and it's the same reason that you write anything down, that you codify it, is so that these practices will continue into the future, regardless of any changes in personnel or leadership that may happen. We want it to be something that's on the books. And I think, besides the fact that we already do this, I think one thing also that comes up is people might say, well, we don't have a problem with this in Natick, right? People aren't, they're not getting reported to ICE by the police department or something. We don't have this problem. But I also think, or we don't have a problem with people having fear of coming forward to town services or something like that. And I think that that's looking at it a little bit too narrowly, because by definition, we wouldn't know, right? If there's people in town who feel like who are not maybe participating in government or maybe participating in other aspects of civic life, because they're afraid, we wouldn't know that. And so I think it's important to be forward-looking by putting a policy in place so that people know, and so we don't wait for there to be a problem, that we be proactive about this important equity issue. So with that, I'll go to my last slide, which is how you can help. So one thing is there's a link in the chat right now where you can sign up for our email list for the Immigration Policy Coalition. You can keep up to date on the work that we're doing around this. You can also, of course, talk to your friends and neighbors about why this is important. Direct them to the video of this event if you think it's been helpful. And of course, now and in the future, ask questions and provide feedback. I mentioned at the beginning, the reason we're doing this is to reach out to other people and just see kind of where people are at with this and what their thoughts are and what their questions are. So, Miriam's going to lead that discussion in a moment, but we definitely encourage that now. And even after this, if you want to get in touch with any of us, I'm sure that we're happy to talk to you further. But I really just want to say I appreciate everyone, of course, who participated in the panel, but also everyone who's chosen to take time out of their evening to attend this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Miriam.
Thank you so much, Cody. And so now we are opening it up to all of you to ask questions, and then maybe even start with your first reaction to what has been presented. It was a lot of information, but it's our hope that you're beginning to get a picture, right, of what is it that we're already doing, but why we want to really be more intentional about having an immigration policy in town. We have a question from Dhruva, and if you can unmute yourself and then you're able to ask the question.
Thank you for giving me this chance to ask this question. So my question is regarding some specific data points, some data that you know. This discrimination and harassment of immigrants, in my experience and knowledge, I think it is targeted towards immigrants of color. And what does your data say in that respect, that when there are immigrants who are white, they are just ignored, they get the same treatment as the rest of the others, but an immigrant, if one of color, is subjected to all those harassments and discrimination that had been discussed and listed over here. So I'd be very grateful if you could throw some light on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhruva.
I would love to
Go
take a
ahead,
shot at that. Yep. So Dhruva, I would say actually that it works in both directions. For example, individuals with any accent of any kind have been arrested. U.S. citizens with an accent have been arrested by police that were deputized by ICE and deported. So we've had U.S. citizens simply for having an accent being deported to another country. But anyone with an accent can feel othered in the course of their conversations and interactions, just for having a particular accent. Having said that, the United States sadly has a history of slavery, and it's difficult to use any other word than apartheid to describe the Jim Crow era, and its overlap with the entry of immigrants during that particular time frame in the 1800s tells us that historically this has been an evolving issue, but it peaked in the late 1800s as white employees were finding themselves out of work during the Depression era and prior to the Depression era. And so in the mid 1800s, or just after the Civil War, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act here in the United States. But right after the Civil War, we also enacted anti-slavery amendments to our Constitution, which were immediately challenged on the hopes of scaling back the rights of immigrants on the basis of extremely hard-fought work done by civil rights activists during the Civil War and right after the Civil War. So we all owe a debt of gratitude to our African-American colleagues who survived centuries of slavery and a civil war to advance the rights of citizenship by birth in this country, which was challenged under the Chinese Exclusion Act directed toward Asians initially. And luckily, the Supreme Court decided, and you might find this interesting, Dhruva, that Chinese Americans, people born of Chinese American parents, were permitted to retain their US citizenship, because if they did not, then millions of Scotch, Irish, Italian, and German children of immigrants would also lose their citizenship. So it was for that reason that citizenship by birth was actually enshrined or protected under the 14th Amendment. So I just think that over time, Dhruba, our immigration has become more colorful over the course of time, and the reactions to them have at times crossed the line to very clear xenophobia. And I think that it's really important that we remember the past and we do not repeat those past errors, and remember that we are all here thanks to the extremely hard work that was already laid down by many others who've lost their lives to create this beloved community.
Thank you, Susan. Are there other questions? And then if you have a specific person that you want to ask it to, please do so. Rolf?
Yes, this may be a question for Cody. I understand that Amherst is one community in Natick, in Massachusetts, that has declared itself a sanctuary community. And I also understand that there is numerous other towns or cities that have declared themselves a sanctuary community. My question is, what do you see as the difference in the process in Natick that has led us to move towards the label welcoming and not a sanctuary community? And I understand the politics and the fraught reaction to sanctuary, but I still am curious about the answer to that question.
It's a
Cody
good
and
question.
then
Yeah,
Marge also.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, sure. We can both talk on it. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think that, you know, like I said, we didn't come up with the language welcoming like it is in some of those other policies that you mentioned in some of those other places. I think some of them call it sanctuary, some of them call it welcoming. But I think, you know, we talked about this a lot as a group. We actually had a lot of reflection on it and thinking about, you know, how we wanted to present it and label it. And I think that, you know, it's certainly not backing away from anything. I think that the provisions of it are, you know, that we would want are very similar to the ones that are labeled sanctuary policies. And, you know, being a sanctuary town, if that's what people want to call it, I don't think any of us have a problem with that. I just think that the label welcoming, I think we felt ultimately as a group was a little bit more accurate to what the policy does and doesn't do. And so, you know, I think when you think about a sanctuary, you know, many people consider that to be something broader, to be a place where you can get housing, right? Like when you talk about churches that provide services to immigrants and things like that, where you can actually get temporary housing and, you know, food support, you know, financial support, things like that, which, you know, these policies don't offer that, right? I mean, they're sort of designed to have kind of a baseline of equity in the way that we treat people, but they're not affirmatively offering a sanctuary in that sense. And so, you know, we didn't want to kind of overpromise, and we wanted to focus on what the policy actually does. So, you know, it's not, I mean, sure that the politics of it is part of it, but it's not just like, oh, we want to, you know, trick people into thinking this is a welcoming policy, but it's actually a sanctuary policy. You know, we're pretty open about what it is. It's just that we think that label is a little bit more accurate. And Marge, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Marge, you are muted.
You're muted, yeah.
One of the towns that I studied, their suggestion was to not call it sanctuary specifically because often people think of churches when they think of sanctuary policies, where people are housed in a church and given sanctuary. And as Cody said, that isn't what we're trying to do with this policy. We're just trying to help make sure people feel that they're welcome here. And sanctuary is a very weighty term, both politically, but also because of the sense of sanctuary in a sanctuary, a place where someone can be away from, you know, be cared for and protected. So those were a couple of things, as Cody said, that we thought about when we moved away from sanctuary to welcoming.
Thank you, Marge and Cody. other questions that you may have for the panelists? Daniel.
Hi, my question is, I think for Caitlin about the schools, and she talked about the large number of students, especially the newcomers this year. Are there expectations for this to, and you mentioned establishing a program at Wilson. Are there expectations that these numbers will continue to go up?
Yeah, I think it's in our world, it's really hard to predict who will stay and who will leave. So we do have that like note of, you know, we can't really predict it. But we're looking at, we measure all student progress and performance yearly. So we're kind of looking at the numbers that we've built now with the expectation that more will come over the summer. So I do think these numbers will probably increase a little bit, and hopefully we'll just keep expanding, and then it will be there if people decide to move into Natick as they come.
Thank you, Caitlin. Other questions? We'd love to hear from those that are willing to share. How are you feeling about this? What is your reaction to the proposal that is on the table? Ralph? Or
Well,
Celeste?
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I am all in favor of it, and I would just like to thank you all of you who have done this work for our community, and for presenting this opportunity tonight. I think it's so important to be seen as a welcoming place for all, and I will do whatever I can to support you in this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Susan, Deb, go ahead.
I think that Natick is on the cutting edge of this, because we have elected our first Black select woman, Kristen Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
not only that, but I know this community has welcomed Natick Black Lives Matter too.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that it's a step in the right direction, because everybody should feel welcome, and people shouldn't feel afraid, you know, when they, as an immigrant or otherwise. So it's a step in the right direction, I believe. I like it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I might just add that one positive sort of action that we can take along the lines of what Pastor Deb is referring to here is the idea of adding to the portfolio of whoever takes on the mantle of diversity and inclusion within the town of Natick, ideas, creative ideas of how to signal the fact that we would like to be a immigrant-friendly community, and for that person to reflect and hear from all of us what are some of the ways that that person can advance that. And again, I'm just very mindful of the fact that the African-American community has often been leapfrogged by white immigrants who have been able to make the American dream possible by assimilating and integrating over the generations. And we do have to remember that we all are hand in hand with each other to help move us all together forward so that no one is left behind.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Susan. And a reminder also that our last Martin Luther King Day, the keynote speaker, Kevin McCarthy, asked of all of us, right? What is it that you are going to do personally to continue to build the beloved community in this town, and what is it that we are going to do collectively to build that beloved community. And so I think that there is already a charge for all of us to continue thinking about how we do that in Natick, and not, just do it for Martin Luther King Day, and then we go our separate ways. So I think we have an opportunity here to continue building on that legacy. Any other questions or comments?
I have a kind of a policy next step question. So is the hope that this might go in front of town meetings, select board, ... in the fall, or what's your path look like, or what are you hoping for right now?
Cody?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you saw that list of cities and towns that have adopted this before, and those with town government have actually taken a few different pathways to adopting a policy. But many of them have done it through their select board. And I think that's a good path for us for a number of reasons, because the select board does set policy for the town, for town employees. And it I think is a good place for this process to happen. Now, you can do it through town meeting as well. You could do it through, some of those towns have done it through a bylaw at town meeting, which has the advantage of being a little bit more permanent, I guess. But I think the select board process, also allows it to be a little bit more flexible, as other speakers have mentioned. As we get more ideas about how to become a more welcoming community, and we might want to tweak the policy a little bit, I think that would be good for us. So, like I said, kind of modeling on some of these other communities that have already taken this step, I think the select board would be the likely place that we would get this done in Natick. And as far as the timeline part of your question goes, I think that at this point, this is the beginning of sort of a public outreach process. I think it's not just going to be one event. I think we want to, talk to more people who are stakeholders in and out of government, get more input, and hear from people about it, and, kind of work that into what this might look like. And then, for the select board, I can't speak for how they might decide to take this up, or when they might decide to take this up. I know there's a few of them here tonight, and I know they're very, very busy. So, it's not, there's no guarantee on timeline. Obviously, from our perspective, I think that we want to, move this forward as quickly as possible, but also not too quickly, because we want people to, we want the whole community to be behind it, because we see this as a first step towards being a welcoming community, not a final step or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Cody. And it's important for us to have the support of our community. So all of you that are here tonight, come with us, add your names and support what we're doing, because that is what is important, that the whole community is behind this, not just a few of us. I have Donna hands up, and then Michelle also. Go ahead, Donna.
I just really wanted to thank you all for this conversation. It's really, it's so thoughtful and so well done, and just really organized and comprehensive. I wanted to ask Cody, is there a draft of the policy that exists so far? And is it possible maybe that you all could do listening sessions on the draft, so there could be broader participation from the community? And I also wanted to say, I come from an immigrant family. I have dual citizenship. My grandmother was Irish. My grandmother said she was related to everybody in town, which was how they ended up getting on the police department. So I've been there, and I can't be anything but compassionate and welcoming. And I think this is really important. I think something like a seal is important, but this is probably so much more important. This is our actions and how we are going to interact with each other. So thank you so much for tonight, and I hope there'll be more to come.
Thank you, Donna. So I always say that this is what justice and love looks like in public. So I appreciate all the support that we are getting here. Michelle?
And, sorry, but I wanted to answer Dr. McKinney,
Go ahead,
Donna's comment. Just the question she asked about the listening sessions, which I think is a really great idea. And I think that's that is something we want to do. We do have a draft. We haven't gone public with it yet or anything like that. It includes some of the provisions that were in the slide deck. But I think we're pretty close to having something that, we can workshop with people as a possibility. Now, of course, we're a citizen activist group. We're not the select board. It would ultimately be up to them what policy to adopt. I'm sure they'd run it by town council and things like that. But, the idea of having listening sessions, I think, where people could look at a draft that would show the basic idea of what this outline of what this could look like, I think is a great one. So, thank you very much for that suggestion.
Well,
And
thank
if
you.
there are groups that you think that we should be conducting listening sessions with, and if you can organize one and say, okay, guys, come and we will be there, it will be very, very helpful because we're also all busy individuals like all of you. And so the more support that we get, the better. Michelle?
Thank you, Miriam. Just echoing what everyone shared about just gratitude for this holding space tonight for all of us to kind of learn and come together. I'm curious if we know if there's data in our community of Natick, if most of the community members who we're talking about tonight are here with school-age children. I'm just curious if that's what we're seeing the majority of kind of our newcomer families. And as someone who works for a community organization like Miriam and Lee and April do, I also wonder kind of how can we help, and also thinking about, as hopefully this moves forward, this message that we share in the community is one that those of us who work for organizations that serve the community would like to amplify too. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm just, again, curious about if there is data around the kind of number of individuals that might be here with children.
Caitlin, I will pass it to you because I think that is something that you already kind of presented, but probably know more about.
That's a really good question. And, I actually, because I am so focused on, my specific counterpart of teaching and seeing our kids here, I'm not recognizing a lot of names, but I would love to see if you guys would put it in the chat box if you do have children in the Natick Public Schools, or I can put my email in there too, and you guys can reach out to me privately as well.
Yeah, thank you. Question from Dev. I think that Cody, I think you answered this, but just in case, does this policy have to be adopted by select board and or town meeting at some point?
Yeah, yes. So it would have to be adopted either by the select board as a town policy or by town meeting as a bylaw at some point. And like I said, I do think that, while both approaches have been followed by towns in Massachusetts, I think that the select board approach, at least as a starting point, seems like a good path for us when we get to that point.
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh. Nice to see you.
Good evening. Nice to see you as well. Thank you for organizing this, and I appreciate the work of the committee. Obviously, last I looked, the entire select board is on this meeting. So speaking as a citizen, individual, not representing the board's opinions of anything. So that's really important to say. I think what's really important to the conversation, and we did talk about this a little bit I think it was a citizens concerns item when you came forward with this initially with the announcement. Combination of things. First of all, it would certainly be helpful to hear. I know Cody at the beginning talked a little bit about how, in a lot of ways, we do have policies and procedures that are consistent with the proposed policy. And the chief did have some cogent reasons as to why not to codify them. So I do think it's important to this community conversation to have the police perspective on that. And as I recall, they had to do with collaboration with federal authorities. We do not work for the federal government. He does not enforce any of that. But as the chief of police, he and the deputy chief are responsible for the policies of the department. And there were some practical reasons because of the nature of regional law enforcement and interactions with the federal agencies that this could create situations that might make it difficult for them to operate in the current way. Again, I'm not an expert on it. I don't remember the details, but it just as we move forward with a community dialogue, I do think it's important to have that information. items of information that are important for community members are the progress we have made as a community in terms of we last year hired a director of communications within the town, which never existed before. That individual will also support the forthcoming director of equity, inclusion, and outreach. And my understanding is we are in the process of finalizing an offer with somebody in that role. And as some of you may know, we're also, I made the comment at our last board meeting, we're going to be initiating a citizen petition for a charter commission over the next few months. So our form of governance itself, I think, is going to be a subject of discussion in the community in the months ahead. So there are a lot of concurrent and related aspects to this that would impact, I think, the effectiveness of adopting it and the timing of it. But I just, again, I raise all of these issues just as an awareness, you know, as we have community conversations. This is an important part of identifying what we want as a community and how we want to do it. So, well, I did notice that I took a quick glance at the list of the towns and cities that were there. Many of them are city forms of government, and I think have a different sort of structure than we do. So from my perspective, personally, I look at the issue of being a welcoming community it is an action-based issue. Policies, to Cody's point, are important because they do codify things beyond individuals and put it into an institutional knowledge. But somewhere between that, you know, making sure that we don't have unintended consequences of how we codify things. Natick has notoriously done things to protect itself from itself that we are now undoing because people felt we needed policies around certain things. So I appreciate the deliberative approach that you're taking, the thoughtful approach, and that this is one of, you know, of the beginning of multiple dialogue sort of sessions about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Cody?
Thank you. Yeah, I just that's all great, and I appreciate that those thoughts. I think that the point about and I don't want to speak for Chief Hicks, but we have had conversations with him about this, and I think that he, at least in those conversations, he had communicated to us not necessarily in opposition to codifying it in general. I think there's he actually said to us that, you know, this is something that has been in the pipeline at the Natick Police Department for a while to have a written policy around this. But I think he did have some concerns about specific provisions related to what Paul was just saying around, you know, regional collaboration and kind of, you know, not so much collaborating with ICE because they don't really do that now, but kind of making sure that the lines of communication remain open to understand what ICE is doing in the community, I think was how he put it. Again, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he had those concerns around it, and I think it's fair concern. And I think that, you know, it kind of, in a way, it sort of goes back to Donna's question about the specific language, because a lot is obviously on that about what, you know, what kind of carve outs may exist to be able to allow those kind of things to continue while we still, you know, make a strong statement and have a strong policy. And I think it is possible, you know, definitely to find the right common ground on that. And I think we'll continue to have, you know, follow up. You know, we have talked to him, but we haven't gotten back with him in a bit since we've had like a little bit more time to ruminate on this. So I think it is a good idea for us to kind of restart those conversations and see where we can find a path forward. So.
I would just also, I'm not going to address the police question, although I do want to say, I want to speak to one particular police or law enforcement related issue, but then I want to more directly address Select Board Member Paul's comments about existing policies and our form of government or potential changes in our form of government. With respect to the issue of public safety within the town of Natick, I know it was addressed very generally that there is a sort of positive policy initiative for having an open immigration policy, and that actually has to do with the federal law itself, and that's because there are 7 enumerated crimes for which anyone, whether they are documented or not, but if they are undocumented, if they are the victim of that crime and they report that to the police, that will eventually can eventually lead to an immigration status for that person. They first of all have to be the victim of a crime. It has to be certified by the police department, and then they have to cooperate with the future investigation of that crime. And that willingness to come forward and expose themselves despite their unclear immigration status is what then grants them the benefit to then get legal permanent residency in the United States. And that's the U visa process. And so there are many, many towns, and I routinely see this. Certification is a Form 918 done by various police departments. And I know that Chief Hicks is very much interested in ensuring that individuals who might not be documented are willing to come forward. You don't also have to necessarily be a victim of a crime. You can be a witness to a crime, and you can be an important eyewitness to advance the resolution of crime. And those are the things that we definitely want to make sure people feel comfortable doing. At the same time, there is a carrot and stick fear on the part of police departments that if they are seen as protecting immigrants, that they might not be clued into activities that ICE might be conducting in the community. And I think that's a conversation that we can further have to see whether the benefits outweigh the negatives with respect to that, which I would respectfully say that the benefits very much do outweigh that, but there's always space for conversation regarding that. With respect to the existence of policy or existence of things that are out there, the fact that we're having this conversation and training our eyes toward policies, but not actually like seeing them in the way that we thought we were seeing them, goes to show why it's important to actually have an affirmative statement about the status of immigrants in our community. And so it's very easy to rewrite history by not looking at it. And so one thing that we can do to memorialize and ensure that our intentions are understood is by calling attention to that. And I think that's one of the reasons why the spirit of having an equity, inclusion, and outreach position it's about naming it and calling it something real, so that people know that this is something that is not just sort of bypassed in a future year when our focus and our attention, our gaze is elsewhere. And then finally, I would say that whether we're a town or a city or any particular form of government that we choose, that it's very important that, again, we call attention to this. And in fact, being a town and being a smaller, let's say, more citizen-led group doesn't make it any less urgent or necessary. I think Marjorie made a great point about this. The law has changed 3 times since we started these slides. Since we've worked on these slides. So I think that that's something to bear in mind, is that the reason why people need constancy and some sense of understanding what the reality of their life would be like is because there are so many other moving parts that it makes it it's almost unbearable. And I can personally attest to people who are literally right in front of us every single week, who have come up to me in our community and told me that they are not documented. And I've known them for years, but when they found out I was an immigration lawyer, they then revealed their status. And you would be saddened or shocked, or I'm not sure what the words would be, to realize who among us is not necessarily what they might appear to be at first glance. And so people feel so incredibly vulnerable that if you don't know someone, you actually do. I promise you that you do. And many, in fact. So I know that they cannot have a voice. The reason why they're not participating, let's say, in a civic engagement event is because it's against the law to hold yourself out as anything other than an immigrant. So if you take a public position on a policy issue and someone thinks you're doing it because you're a citizen and you're encouraging someone to go vote on a proposal at town meeting, or or to vote in a election because somebody is saying that they have a policy that will assist them. That's federal fraud. And so even though they themselves might not be doing that, if they're perceived as doing that alone, could create tremendous trouble for them. They might not get a visa renewed, or they might be deported because they held themselves out to be a citizen when in fact that's not what they were trying to do. So you're not going to see, that's why you don't see immigrants out there protesting and fighting for their rights, and they are the most vulnerable among us. So I hope that those of us who do have that voice can then exercise it for those who cannot.
Thank you so much, Susan. And Paul, you wanted
Yeah, no, thank you. Susan, thank you. That was interesting. I wasn't aware of that. I guess a question I have, obviously as elected officials, we represent citizens that vote, but we represent the community. So we rely on census data. Documented and undocumented people can be respondents to census data. So I'm curious about that discrepancy between, how if we rely on census data to make some policy decisions, is that not the equivalent of listening to the opinion of somebody who doesn't disclose their immigration status? It's a tricky, that's a shocking piece of information that you just shared. So
it's not actually, because immigrants don't respond to the census data if they can avoid it.
Well, but they can.
Well, but they won't.
Well, but I'm talking objectively here, though. The fact is, in some cases they do. There's active outreach because we try to set our policies and our budgets in the states, and we that's the hope.
I understand.
And that's part of why we have so much active outreach. No, I'm asking just for clarification, because that's what you said about that it being federal fraud.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah. So for example, I'll give you another specific example. There's the public charge rule. So under federal law, you could be denied an immigration benefit if you're deemed to be a public charge. President Biden has tried to encourage immigrants to apply for benefits and services, but immigrants are incredibly fearful of doing that because about less than 2 years ago, you could be deported for being deemed a public charge. So now that the rule has changed a couple of years later, immigrants are really hesitant because they're not sure whether or not they can apply for a benefit. During the previous presidential administration, the census attempted to ask questions that would cause an individual to essentially, declare that they were undocumented, the nature of the questions. And there was litigation around what the questions were and what could be asked. And so, yes, no individual, only a U.S. citizen, 18 years of age and older with legal capacity can vote in a United States election. So individuals who hold themselves out, who comment or give an opinion in public about what the law should be or could be, that could lead someone to believe that they are asking someone else to vote on something, but that they themselves also plan to vote on that. And so to avoid any question of that being the case, they will avoid at all costs having any doubt or confusion about that. And so I'm not going to invite the individuals on this panel and some that I see here who actually have that situation, because I don't want to put them on the spot. But I can absolutely guarantee you that the last thing that person would want to do was state a public policy position or make a statement that could potentially give the impression that they want you to vote. They themselves intend to vote on that particular topic.
Yeah, and I think
that's not confusing. I hope that's not. I apologize if that's confusing in any way, but
I think it also bears mentioning on that our government, our form of government here, for better or worse, is Paul, is so participatory based, and it's so you can't. Right? There's not that many people who participate, and so it's if you do, you can have an outside, you can have good voice. People can, you can have opportunities to contribute. And I think that, it's the census data, I think it's good if, to the extent that people respond to it. I think everyone agrees that there's certainly an undercount of undocumented people, even if some do respond. And so I think that, it'd be nice if we were able, when we have meetings about our schools and about roads or whatever it is about, that people feel like they were able to speak at those. But, obviously they're mindful of violating federal laws, as Susan said. So anyway, but go back.
Yeah, so thank you for this a very meaningful conversation and being able to listen to each other. But we have come to, it actually has passed the time of our conversation. And so wondering, I know that Dhruva has his hand up, but maybe just quickly end with that question. Dhruva?
Yeah, very quickly. I know there are some towns and cities which are, trying to get the green card holders to vote in local elections, and which will need a House rule petition to be passed by the state legislature. So how is that happening if, they are not citizens, but, what I mean? I mean, how is that happening, and whether the First Amendment applies only to citizens or to all residents of the United States? Thank you.
Susan, I think you have the answer.
Let me start with the black letter law. The black letter law is that no individual, unless they are a US citizen aged 18 years of older and with legal capacity, can vote in an election. I think it is an untested area, whether or not a state wants to allow an undocumented individual to vote on something other than a federal election. However, I find I'm not going to say a non-starter, but I'm pretty much like on the verge of saying that's a non-starter.
Thank you. Cody, do you
No,
want
go
to
ahead.
wrap it up?
Go ahead. I know we're over time. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. So mainly, I'm again putting the form in the chat, and thank you so much for attending this conversation. Please fill out the form, reach out to us, and let's make sure then that we continue this conversation. Thank you so much to the panelists for their time, and for the colleagues at Natick is United and everybody that has participated to make possible this conversation tonight. I'm very encouraged by the conversations that all of us in this conversations in Zoom, looking forward to being able to do this in person and maybe conducting some of those listening sessions that were suggested. So thank you so much. Have an awesome rest of your evening. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. That was really awesome. And hopefully we will be able to conduct some of the listening sessions with actually in person. I think that would be really great. Really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Good
night.